What will you do when your money works for you? Welcome to the Tech Girl Financial Podcast with your hosts, Victor and Kim Gaxiola. From the home office in California, here is Victor and Kim.
Welcome back to the Tech Girl Financial Podcast. I am your host, Victor Gaxiola, and what you'll note is today I am actually flying solo. So Kim isn't going to join me in today's podcast, but please don't let that keep you from listening to today's podcast because we have an amazing guest in Matt Maule who's going to be sharing his insights on the travel industry, doing a deeper dive on the cruise industry where he's recently been working, and share some thoughts on where we might be headed next as it relates to the entirety of travel in our country and, of course, on a global stage. Now, some of you may know that prior to working in the financial services industry, I actually started my career in what I would consider the hospitality/airline industry. So started my career, if you will, working at Westin hotels out in Los Angeles while I was going to school. And then while working there, I used to see all the flight attendants come in and pilots, and they were flying off to exotic locations and staying at the hotel at discounted rates. And so my attention shifted, and I said, I really want to work in the airline industry. So I ended up working for 10 years with United Airlines in multiple locations, starting in San Francisco, moving to Miami, and then eventually getting to Chicago. And it was in that Miami to Chicago transition that I had the good fortune of meeting Matt Maule, who is our guest today. And we've established a very strong relationship over the course of the last 2 decades. And so it gives me great pleasure to have him on the program to share his thoughts and insights on the travel industry. So without further ado, here is my interview with Matt as we unpack the world of travel. Enjoy. So joining us from Miami, we have Matt Maule, who I've known, as I said in the introduction, for many years, to get his insights on the travel industry. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Victor. Great to be here with you.
So, wow. Before we do a real deep dive on all of this fun stuff, why don't you share with everybody a little bit more about your background?
Sure. Okay. I was born in the UK, and I spent a little bit of time when I first began my career outside of the travel industry, but got into it pretty much in the mid-90s, working initially for United Airlines over in London. And then I moved to Miami. Then I moved to Chicago, all with United still. That's where, obviously, Victor and I, we met. Then my wife, who's originally from Florida, had her fair share of cold winters in Chicago. So she encouraged me to try and find a job in Miami. I was able to do that with the Royal Caribbean Group, and I joined Royal Caribbean back in 2005 and have been there up through 2021.
So airline industry, cruise industry, two similar but different, so you can provide perspective on both. And what I was really hoping that we could unpack is just getting this perspective. We've just faced, 2 years now, and it's going on 3, of amazing change, across the entire world, obviously, in dealing with this pandemic. But the travel industry was probably one of the industries that got hit the hardest, because as soon as things started happening, people were not traveling. They couldn't travel. They couldn't go overseas. Cruises were some of the first, I'd say, victims of the pandemic, just because there was such a spotlight on them. So to start off, why don't you share with us, what's your perspective on the state of the entire travel industry? And then maybe we can do a deeper dive on each one of the specific areas.
Sure. So it's obviously been buffeted around heavily in the last 2 years. As of probably February, February of 2020 indications that things were going to get a little squirrely, and then by March, cruise lines have begun to shut down operations, not knowing quite how long that was going to last, but they were encouraged to and happy to make adjustments really, really quickly. I think, what's different about this period we're going through right now is just how long it's lasted. I know that's very obvious, but I jotted down a few of the incidents and periods in the travel industry where there were issues before in terms of demand and management. And just going back to 2000, obviously there was 9/11 and the massive impact, the shutdown of operations, but it was fairly short. What was difficult after 9/11 was getting the sort of lucrative, profitable business travel back again. But within the year, I think it was fairly predictable how trends were going to go. And predictability is important, I think, for travel, so they can continue to invest in routes and aircraft and services, and the same thing for cruises as well. Also at United, we went through Chapter 11 in 2002. We went through the SARS pandemic, or the SARS outbreak in 2003. There was the Iraq War, and there was the economic crash in 2007, 2008. And I was at the cruise lines by then. There was swine flu. There was a cruise industry specific event that stymied demand, which was the Costa Concordia incident back in 2012. There were volcanoes erupting in Iceland. Zika came and went. And then the sort of impact, particularly on European travel, the impact of terrorism, really around 2016 all the way through 2019. And all of these things had various effects on either all of the travel industry or specific operations, whether it was airlines or cruise lines. But this has gone on, almost 2 years. And so that chronic dragging down of travel hope, aspirations, has really impacted, obviously, the industry. And I think, it's kind of retracted a little bit into itself. So now the industry, I think, is, at least for the cruise lines, without operations for a year and a half, and definitely not full operations yet, although they're getting very close. The big challenge they're going to face is really bringing consumer demand back up to the levels it was at pre-COVID. And I think all of the cruise lines were really enjoying a purple patch of demand, high net promoter scores, great feedback, great products, new hardware, new ships on order, and a growing population of people who are willing to try a cruise for the first time, which was the challenge. When I first joined the cruise lines back in 2005, there was less capacity, but it was still being added. And the concern was always, can we drive cruise to be a popular vacation choice? And I think over the years, many brands have done really well in explaining what a cruise was all about, eliminating some of the barriers a normal consumer would have in terms of selecting a cruise as a vacation, because until you've done it, you really don't know quite what to expect. And I think the industry has really reached a point where, a lot of people knew what to expect about a cruise. And then when they get on board a cruise, irrespective of the brand, they generally have a really good time.
Well, I've had my fair share of cruises to know that that's true. And it's one of those things that once you do it, you want to keep doing it, just because, quite honestly, the convenience of taking a cruise, of getting on board, and then it's a floating hotel, casino, entertainment center that's taking you to exotic port with good food and entertainment. It's the perfect vacation, especially for families, I think. But I want to go back to what you had said. It's it's interesting when you broke down this timeline of headwinds that the travel industry has faced, and you really only went through, the last 20 years or so since 911. And so this isn't the first time, obviously, that the travel industry has faced some adversity, but I think it's the longevity of that adversity that's been different. That the bounce backs from others have been quicker. And in addition to that, that many of the incidents that you were sharing might have been isolated to specific regions of the world. So when the volcanoes were erupting in Iceland, I remember that. There was it really did make an impact on the transatlantic travel. However, it didn't really affect the Asian travel market. The difference with the pandemic is it affected everybody. So what I wanted to get to, because as you know, as an eternal optimist, is what did we learn and what do we continue learning in the past couple of years in general in travel industry, and then maybe more specifically in the cruise industry, that was good, that we can learn from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we learned that the industry is pretty resilient.
Mm-hmm.
Post 9/11, there was quite a lot of bankruptcy filings. There was a lot of consolidation. It took a long time for the airlines, I think, to get back on their feet. Their business model was, from a profitability perspective, fueled by corporate travel, and then kind of enhanced by leisure travel. With the cruise lines, it's all leisure travel. I mean, there's a bit of corporate. There's some corporate relationships that result in people cruising, whether it's sales incentive prizes or full ship charters, for example, of companies who like to reward their best employees or just get all of their employees together for an annual celebration. But most of cruise is leisure travel. So the industry has been extremely resilient to all of the issues and challenges it's faced over the years. But it does react in a fairly predictable way, I would say. It takes it kind of rolls with the punches to begin with until the issue is over, and then it will often price itself out of a demand trough, which it can be in, because a percentage of the consumer base is looking at things saying, well, I'm not going to travel until this thing is fixed. And one of the stimuli to getting them over that is they see a price that's very attractive, or there's a great promotion, and that will encourage them to put their fear aside and get back on board or get back to cruising.
Mm-hmm.
In this situation, I think what the cruise lines have found is that they were at basically the mercy of government and media messaging. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, cruise lines were in the headlines around the world. It wasn't just in North America, but it was particularly in other places as well. And the stories were compelling in terms of how people's lives and vacations, not in that order of priority, of course, but how they were affected by their involvement. They were on a cruise and they were stranded, or it appeared that they were stranded. The cruise lines did a great job and always do a great job at trying to ensure that people's lives aren't disrupted to the extent that they can control that. But they really, I think what everyone learned between then and now, particularly in the cruise industry, was that keeping constant communication with their customers was very, very important, because the sort of window of return was unknown. Communicating particularly about people's upcoming cruises, letting them know if they were going to be cancelled or redeployed or rescheduled, or they were still continuing as was the original intent. So that one-to-one communication, keeping people updated, and then making sure, I think they got pretty good at this, making sure that they weren't tone deaf, and also at the same time bombarding them with sales and promotional communication, emails, and social media marketing, etc. So I think they learned that the balance of communication needs to be right for consumers to stay loyal to their brands. That's the second thing I think everyone learned, was that this is the time where loyalty programs and good relationships with the brands really pay off.
Mm-hmm.
So to some extent, it helps you, to a large extent, I would say, it helps insulate the companies from feeling all of the pain of what they're going through, because there is a core base of consumers who love the brand, who forgive the brand for any transgressions they might make accidentally in communication, or changing people's vacation plans. And I think they learned that the value of the loyalty base. They always do, but I think in these times you really see it. And then I think what they also learned was that during this downtime, which they could weather because of their good relationships with investment institutions, through this downtime, it was really an opportunity to knuckle down on many of the projects they wish they'd done, but they were just too busy running their business. So investing in personalization, investing in technology, all of which were around being able to provide consumers with more curated options for them to think about when it comes to booking a vacation.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really, I find it interesting that, when it comes to loyalty, I can completely understand that in wanting to maintain, let's say, loyalty to a specific brand. I think one thing that might have helped, well, I think to a large extent helped the cruise industry and airlines and hotels brands as well, was the fact that consumers recognized that this was happening. I mean, they were all experiencing it. So it was understandable that, cruises weren't going to be operating. And as you had mentioned early, you were at the whim of not only, public health policy, but governments as well. And a cruise, unlike an airline, like Southwest Airlines flies a lot of domestic, as does United, but they also have international operations. But cruises, like any cruise that leaves out of Miami, is visiting multiple countries, multiple islands. And so you were not only at the whim of, let's say, the US health policies, but every country had its own approach when it came to the pandemic and their feelings about COVID. So I could see where that was a huge challenge.
Yeah, and every country has different policies, which you then have to try and accommodate within a cruise offering that you present to the public. So those guys, the guys in deployment and itinerary planning, mm-hmm. probably the people who were working most hard during this period, because every minute, every hour, every day, the situation changed. And, not everything obviously gets communicated to the end consumer, but some of the things have to be communicated, particularly if there's a port change on an itinerary, because, some people really want to visit a certain place, and now that place might have put different rules in place in their country, prohibiting or making it more difficult to, get off the ship and go and enjoy that destination that they've been dreaming about for a long time.
So if you were in a consulting capacity, in light of all the headwinds we just talked about and the way the industry is evolving, and let's say you had a boardroom, Matt, and you were in front of the boardroom and you're presenting to airline executives, hotel industry executives, and cruise executives, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that the most important thing they need to be looking at for the next year is the consumer trends that are going on. Mm-hmm. everyone reacts to this situation, any situation, in a different way, and there's no one archetypal cruiser type. The cruising population is made up of many different segments, all motivated by probably slightly different things. And it's the same for business travel, and it's the same for staying in a hotel, whether you're doing domestic or international travel. We're all motivated by different things. But understanding your customer types and seeing how they are performing from a demand perspective, because it's all about, it's all about driving demand to generate revenues in a cost-controlled way to deliver profit and shareholder value, as well as provide fantastic vacations. But you have to drive demand. We've got to drive demand out of this trough. And so you really need to be able to segment your customer base so that you can see how each of them are performing and how each of them are coming back. And they're going to come back at different paces. So after the recession, one way of looking at the customer base was based on, let's say, some core demographics, household income or wealth measures. And the different groups, if I say I'm just going to segment it into 3 groups, the highly affluent, through the middle class, through the less affluent groups. And, all of them take vacations and all of them travel, just with different, different levels. So what we found was that the highly affluent emerged most quickly. They went into the recession most quickly and emerged most quickly. And so, you might get suite bookings, you might get first and business class bookings spiking much sooner than the other classes of travel. Then, and I don't know exactly why, I've got a couple of theories, but it was the less affluent group who then quickly followed. And, the theory could be that the highly affluent people were out spending money again, making money and spending money again, and were spending more on retail or services. And the group, and so that's why the other end of the spectrum started returning as well. But the middle class, that was the middle group, that was the group where it took longer to return to normal travel patterns. I don't know obviously I'm not going to try and forecast without seeing the data, but I don't know what the segments will be or what the dynamics would be, but I think each and every brand has to understand that. What's their customer base? What are the segments within it? How are they performing? So that you can drive the underperformers and also take advantage from a demand perspective of the groups that are doing really well and emerging most quickly from this.
Wow. Well, it's an interesting take on all of it. I remember when all of this got started, I saw something on Twitter which made me laugh. And it was when they were instituting all the shelter-in-place mandates across the country and encouraging people to stay home. And this is before the travel restrictions really started picking up. And it was more kind of on an honor, it was kind of in the honor system about staying home. And I saw someone tweet, well, look, if I have to shelter in place, I might as well shelter in place in Venice in a 4-star hotel because the deals are outrageous.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking they're pretty spot on that. Throughout the pandemic, we actually didn't stop travel. We just had to be much more careful about the approach that we took. And it was really interesting just to get across the country and see how different regions were reacting and, taking the pandemic and how serious they were about mask mandates and people out on the street and such. And I found that the most interesting part about it was that the urban centers were completely abandoned. I had never seen, Philadelphia as empty as I saw it when we were there. I had never seen Boston in the same way.
That wasn't the case in Miami, that's for sure.
Las Vegas was a ghost town last December. I remember being able to cross. I could have probably crawled across the street on the Strip. That would never happen.
I know you've done that a few times, Victor.
Yeah, I've been there a few times, and I was just there recently, actually, to celebrate my son's birthday, and it was very interesting. It was quite the dynamic. It was a real turnaround. There was certainly a whole lot more people out traveling, so that is encouraging. To see people are traveling again. Cruises are, are getting back into it.
Well, it's such a fundamental human need, I think, to want to get out there and see people. There's what they call, I'm sure you've heard it, the revenge spending, where, and also people have more discretionary income in many cases because they've been hunkering down and unable to go out as much as they have previously in the last 2 years. So, I believe we'll see a continuation of that. We've had a couple of tempting precursors to that actually happening. When we felt as a nation and maybe even as a planet that things are going to get back to normal, before the next setback, there is that period of time where, you just see travel going crazy. The airports are chock-a-block full. The load factors are 100%. The booking volumes for all the airlines they're reporting, I think the cruise lines that they're reporting on their earnings calls are buoyant. And then there's just been a series of setbacks. I don't know if they're getting smaller in size, these setbacks, which could be a good indicator of the real change being around the corner. But there's certainly indications that people are really ready to go, and that is a positive for the travel industry for sure.
Well, I think, as you pointed out, we're social animals and we like to see each other. And I was encouraged by the number of people that I talked to that went back to see family during the Thanksgiving holidays. And of course, in anticipation of, the holidays this year and the new year, that will continue. The other area that I'd love to just explore briefly, while I've got you here on the podcast, is the opportunities again, on being again the optimist, in seeing that in other industries we've seen quite a bit of customization and personalization, and I think that there's definitely an opportunity in the travel industry. I see that happening because I thought I read somewhere that the travel agent is getting more and more prevalent and important in assisting people in creating unique and customized experiences. Have you heard the same, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. First of all, I think probably every industry is looking at personalization. Technology has advanced pretty well, pretty quickly around being able to create, handle, process so much data now in a way that doesn't create a massive burden from a technology perspective and an analyst perspective. So I think the ability to create those personalized experiences, whether it's online or on board, the ability is out there. So more and more people, more and more companies will be doing it, and as more and more companies do it, the more and more consumers will expect it in every interaction that they have. I think one of the challenges initially is how do you curate very nuanced and interesting experiences in a simple way? And you can probably present a simple set of options for consumers, but it's going to be a challenge, I think, for everyone to present really richly individualized offerings that appeal to everything you are about as a person. And so what we might find, first of all, is a sort of phased delivery of personalization. First of all, it will account for 80%. I'm just throwing that number out there, of the customer base, but it won't account for the 20%. You could make an argument, and maybe it's true, that the 20% that it doesn't cater to are the experienced people who are wanting to get something different. And that's where it kind of keys in, I think, to what you said, where people will be looking for experts outside of the digital space where they can find information. They'll be looking for experts who can provide those insights, those kind of that behind the scenes knowledge, the experience of great places to go visit. And I think that will definitely happen, particularly if people are going to be doing catch-up vacations and maybe taking 2 or 3 major vacations a year instead of just the one with a couple of weekend trips. So I could definitely see that happening. And then even pre-COVID, I think in the younger demographic groups, what I'd seen and read in a couple of cases actually is younger, more affluent consumers looking for travel were actually calling into call centers. You would imagine that group who are so digitally savvy would spend their time only online and never want to interact with a real person, because why would they need to? And I think the reason they would need to was because they appreciate the difference of dealing with a live person, because you can get that very curated, highly knowledgeable advice from them. So whether it was a call center for the brand or a travel agent with a call center, connecting live with an expert, I think was was different for particularly the millennial age group, who'd grown up really with technology most of the way through their life.
Well, I'm encouraged by just the fact that the latest trips that I've taken, I've seen more people, on board, and I do get a lot of emails from different airlines offering me, great deals to get out and explore. And I hope that continues as the industry kind of pulls out of this. But I think that, as you had pointed out in the podcast, in that time, a lot was learned, and that focus on their loyal customers and how they can provide a better travel experience, whether it's an airline, a hotel, or a cruise line, is going to be key to the recovery going forward. So as we close, do you have any final thoughts again to where we're headed in the next year or two?
I think there'll be a flurry, a continued flurry for a while yet of great prices and promotions that all travel companies will be putting out there. One, because they'll need to drive demand, but 2, they'll see a response from those reduced prices and those richer promotions. And, when you see results from a reduced price or a richer promotion, you're going to want to do more of it to keep that growth coming. And so I think it'll be a while where we'll be encouraged by these major brands to use their product, and it's going to be good deals to great places. And I think we'll have a lot of choice and a lot of options. And the good news is, for the great brands, they'll be able to attract new customers with these great prices and great promotions, which will help fill a funnel later in 2, 5, 10 years, as more people are encouraged, because sometimes the barrier to cruising is simply price. And so when the prices are lower, there's fewer people that will object to spending that amount of money on a cruise, which is already great value, but in some people's minds, they don't know what to expect. So this is a good sort of top of funnel strategy as well, going out for the next decade for cruise in particular, I would think.
So book now, get out. This is all good. I want to thank Matt. I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing your insights on the travel industry and both the headwinds and challenges, but more importantly now is the opportunities that the industry faces going forward.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Victor. And you want to sort out a trip to Vegas, maybe in March?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's do it.
Find me, and we'll get out there. We will not crawl across the strip. We'll have to use the overpasses.
Excellent. All right. See you then.
All right.
So that was my conversation with Matt. I really want to thank him again for joining us on the program, providing his insights. You know, what I found most interesting from our conversation are a couple things. And so if you were taking notes, I was taking notes. But if you were taking notes, the first thing is how the industry itself has been extremely resilient insofar as that the pandemic obviously has been a very long-standing headwind that the industry has faced, but it's not the first time that this industry has had a series of challenges. So Matt kind of walking down that timeline of different events that affected the airline industry, the hotel industry, and the cruise lines was very interesting just to understand that the industry itself is extremely resilient, and we're seeing it bounce back as people start booking trips and taking vacations, and the business traveler starts meeting again. So that's an encouraging sign. The second area that I thought was extremely interesting is how all of these organizations, and it's not unique just to the travel industry, has taken advantage of the data analytics to really be able to understand their customer better, to be in a position to reward them for their loyalty, to provide certain promotions, and to encourage them to start traveling again. And then the third area is this industry is also not immune, I think, to the personalization. It goes back to loyalty that really is trying to create unique experiences for individuals just so that they can get back and enjoy themselves and start seeing each other. So I want to thank Matt for joining us today. Hopefully this podcast has made you feel a little bit more comfortable as to where things are going. And I encourage you to get out, book a trip, visit family and friends, and get out there, because we are social animals, and I think this interaction is important for us. So thank you again for joining me on the Tech Girl Financial Podcast. I promise I will bring Kim back to the next podcast. So with that, we hope you'll tune in next time. So as always, we encourage you to let us know what you think of the podcast, share a question, or if you have a guest that you think we should bring on the program, by all means, just reach out to me directly at victor@techgirlfinancial.com, or you can also find us on Twitter and use hashtag AskTGF. We hope everybody has a very happy holiday season, and we look forward to sharing more with you in 2022. Thank you very much, and Happy New Year.
If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future shows, please send an email to victor@techgirlfinancial.com or join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag AskTGF. We also encourage you to follow us on the Tech Girl Financial page on Facebook and connect with us on LinkedIn.
Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Tech Girl Financial and Cambridge Investment Research, Inc. are not affiliated companies. Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions.